Happy Tuesday, folks. I believe it should be Tuesday for everybody on the call because we're doing this early enough in the morning here. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to, I don't know what iteration this is, but the March 2nd Notary Governance call. We've got a few interesting topics to cover today. So I pasted the link to the deck in the chat. I'm going to do that again because a couple of you joined afterwards. Nice to see everybody here. Feel free to drop where you're dialing in from so we can continue to get to know each other a little bit. But yeah, I'm going to share my screen, hop over to the deck, get started, and we can continue the conversation as the topics come up. Can somebody give me a quick thumbs up who has a video on that you can see my screen? Cool. Thank you very much. All right. Cool. So we're going to talk about some updates to notaries. We'll cover open issues. There's a set of a relatively large set of issues that came up last week that we need to touch back on again and just ensure that we're making progress as a community. And then there's a set of new issues that have been filed that we should discuss in between the last call and this call. And then, of course, as usual, open forum discussion space and look at ways in which we can continue. Kevin, are you able to see the waiting room by any chance?
No, I can no longer see the waiting room in this.
So let me also make you the host so that you can keep adding people. Boom. And I'm going to do the same thing for Megan. Okay, great. Okay. So with that, let's get started. Let's talk about notaries. So the first topic is Fleek reached out and let us know that they're not currently in a position to serve as a notary. So for those of you that remember, the application they filed was around serving as a notary that would basically allow services to be built on Filecoin and automatically get access to data cap for clients of those services. And that was interesting because it would effectively allow a service to be built on which, when other services were built or software was built that would run on top of Filecoin, the clients interfacing with that intermediary to the network could actually receive data cap. That's a pretty compelling story and definitely something in terms of tooling that we need to have in this ecosystem to ensure that clients have access to data cap relatively quickly, as well as the fact that clients that are coming into the ecosystem from these intermediary services, whether it's Textile, Pinata, or others, do get access to that data cap without having to go through several separate steps and disrupt the general flow. In general, I think when we were reviewing the applications, it seemed like a valuable use case. And so it is important to have a notary like this. However, it seems like they don't currently have the time. So that leads to an interesting conversation we haven't had before, which is this idea that a notary now maybe needs to be removed. And that's not something we've set a process for. That's not something we've considered because typically it's been more about notaries who want to become notaries today. And so there's a couple of things that we can talk about in terms of the path forward here. There's an idea that we actually remove their current data cap allocation so they don't have the ability to allocate data cap to the address they initially applied with, from the address they initially applied with. But there's also other implications that come with this in terms of what about other applicants that applied at this time? What happens to notaries that want to put themselves effectively on pause or stop and then become notaries again in the future when they feel like their teams have the bandwidth to do the work that's required to serve as a notary in the network. And so, yeah, just as a community, we should probably talk a little bit about what it means for notary to stop or to go on pause. What are the implications on that particular notary for their future ability to serve as a notary? And then what are the implications on other applicants in the region that want to become a notary? I have some opinions here, but it's more important to ensure that we hear everybody's opinion. And so actually, why don't we stop and talk about it? So my 2 cents are basically that there's a relatively easy path where through the root key holders, we allocated data cap to notaries once we elected them as a community. Through the root key holders, we can set that allocation back to 0, and effectively that notary doesn't have data cap anymore. And then maybe we treat future applications to being a notary as independent of previous performance as a notary. I don't know if that's the right path. I'm curious to hear if others have opinions, especially other notaries that are present today. If you have thoughts on what it means for you to feel like you can't serve anymore, and what you think the implications of that are. I'd love to hear them. Feel free to use the chat or unmute.
Sorry, Julian speaking. Can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we're basically talking about like a notary that's electing to get themselves removed as a notary. So there's two different questions. One is, how do we actually like tactically remove them? Is it more that we set their allocation to 0, or we just let them be and tell people to not send them requests because maybe in the future they'll have time to like do their duty again? And then the second question is, what are the implications on them as a notary in the future, and what are the implications on other applicants that applied and didn't become a notary when they were picked?
Okay, so we are really talking about the case of like Flick today, like they are not able to allocate anything because they are not ready.
Yes.
Okay, so I think they should reapply. Simply, I mean,
yeah.
Do we have a lot of notary in this situation today?
No.
So
I hope not. I mean, there's a bunch of notaries that have still, allocated very small amounts of their granted data cap. Many are still in single-digit percentages. So, but there's progress being made at least. So I think in general, at least from what I've heard, they're the only ones so far that have approached the topic of saying, hey, like self-electing themselves out of this role.
yeah, so we have two different process. One for when we want to remove a notary like Flick, and one when we have a notary like which is not allocating the data cap following the rules. That could happen also, like someone that is trying to sell the data cap, or I don't know. Should we have two different process, or should we just have one process, a removal process, which is like we have notaries that decide that we should remove one of the notary and we just remove it?
It's a good question. Is somebody unmuted? I'd love to hear other opinions as well.
Yeah, I was just curious. Do we have many notaries that have applied and were not able to become notaries? Like,
yeah. So the first round of apps, which went through like the rubric as it was being updated, I think it was like 32 or 34 applications, and I think 14 notaries were selected.
Okay.
Does that sound right? 3 times plus? No, maybe more. Because I think we have notaries in North America, Europe, rest of Asia, China. Those are the 4, and then North America and China both had additional 2 in North because of ties, basically. So I think we ended up with like 15 or 16 notaries in the end. But yeah, like about half.
Gotcha.
Kind of new to this stuff, but what makes a notary being allowed or like being disqualified? Are those variables that can change over time?
Yeah, there is a scorecard, Rob, that
Okay,
you have to fill, and then you see what is the score and if you are eligible to be a notary. And then when you have, I don't know if when we start, I think we are not we have less notary than the position that were open. So we didn't have the question to, I think, decide who is going to be notary or not. Am I correct?
Actually, Julian, we had quite a few people apply for that bigger round of notary applications in November.
Okay.
So for that, we basically just took the scores of that rubric that you're referring to, and just ranked people in order and took like the top 3 in every region.
Okay.
So Rob, basically there's a rubric, and the rubric is community governed as well. So like we've had people create issues in the repo to modify the rubric, and so I think it's realistic for you to assume that the rubric will change over time because the needs of the network should change over time.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna have to take a look at it, the rubric itself.
Yeah.
To be sure. Like it's all kind of vague for me. So I'm basically just lurking here, but I'll keep my mouth shut for now.
Julian, I think sorry, Megan, did you have any additional thoughts?
Oh, I mean, I guess my off the cuff is They're also sort of lurking, but I guess my off the cuff is that we should, replace Fleek if we denotarize them, and I would think for the future, like I think that signing up to be a notary and then realizing that that you don't actually have the bandwidth for it, then like making people aware of it and going through the process, like I wouldn't hold it against them for future notary, for
Yeah, I agree with that. Which is why I was kind of wondering, like, is there a path where we actually need to like in this case, right? It's not that they don't want to serve as a notary, it's that they can't right now. Does that mean we could just put them on a pause as well, right? There's like a way in which we could just say clients don't get to request data cap from you for like n number of months. But then is that fair to like the liquidity of the data cap in that market? I don't know. And so my initial thought was, yeah, basically like we remove them by setting them to 0. Then if that brings the number of notaries in the region down below the minimum, which is currently at 3, then we replace them with the next notary that was in line. And in the future, if they want to reapply, that they should be welcome to reapply. But maybe that now means as part of the application, there's also like what's gonna be different this time, so we can ensure that the spot is going to somebody that can serve.
So I think the way are you sort of like proposing that we are implicitly penalizing notaries that have backed off their responsibility once approved by kind of like having them undergoing extra scrutiny in the case they're reapplying to kind of like really tell folks what is different this time? Is that sort of like
I don't know that. Yeah, when you frame it that way, I don't know if that's something we need to do, because
exactly
anyway, role, like people are electing themselves for like the good of the network, right? Like I don't think we make this harder.
Right. And I mean, kind of like they still would have to go through the application process. They still would have to potentially kind of like speak up at the sort of like the governance meeting. And, in the end of the day, I think this would just add another element of subjectivity into this evaluation process, because like, oh, this person or this entity kind of like broke their word, kind of, versus sort of like, let's just try to be as objective as possible, as unopinionated as possible. That would be my my point.
Yeah, I think I agree with Philip there.
I guess the extension of that though, Philip, would be like, why not just leave them with the data cap they've been allocated, and like just ask clients not to request data cap from them for like a month or something.
Doesn't that open up a kind of rough precedent where you could have notaries in the future actually apply when they're not ready? Like it kind of allows you to have people that aren't really committed at the moment. Whereas letting them step down unpenalized just allows them to come back at any time, but doesn't open that up.
Yeah, that I agree with that. Okay. I think that the sort of initial proposal then of set them to 0, so they're no longer serving as a notary. If the region is now below like the minimum number of notaries, then automatically elect the next notary. No implications to future application. You just fill out the app, and based on your scoring, you're equally qualified in the future. Curious to hear what people think. I'm also curious to hear on the second point, because Fleek specifically is in North America. North America specifically had a tie that led to more notaries than the minimum. So removing them will not actually result in North America dipping below 3 notaries. Do we set the precedent where it's still the 3 that we'd set across all the places, or once a notary's been elected, if they're removed, they always have to be replaced?
That depends on what the score of the next one would be, right? If it's a tie again, or I don't know, maybe you need to reevaluate the score every once in a while. Like that's why I was asking what the scoring criteria was. But
yeah, Rob, there's a temporal element. The data cap grant is actually like a one-time allocation, and so once you run out of that, you reapply.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go back to lurking again. Sorry.
That's totally fine. So, but what that does do is it does give like the community a chance to see the influence you've had as a notary, the rubric itself has like a built-in like idea of like building upon your past experience and performance as a notary. So as you successfully dole out certain amounts of data cap, you're effectively eligible to unlock higher and higher amounts of data cap to you as a notary, so that you can increase the influence and the impact that you have to bring useful workload to the network.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So any other thoughts on the second point on like replacing them? My current thinking is to keep the minimum as the stable minimum, just because we don't want to like unfairly then effectively for people that didn't tie on the rubric, they suddenly now had a shot to become a notary, where if they were in any other region, they wouldn't have had that opportunity. So I feel like having like that region minimum is the right consistent metric, and what we can instead do is increase that minimum over time as we start to see usefulness come in from more notaries. And so if we feel that the time is nigh for like moving from 3 to 5, then maybe that's a conversation. But that to me seems like an independent conversation.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense.
I'll give 30 seconds for any dissenting opinions.
Yeah, I hear very little objections indeed.
Yeah, I think it's a relatively not controversial subject. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's move forward. We had an interesting case where one of our notaries, Masaki, he was not able to roll out any data cap. And so as we went through this exercise in the previous governance call of figuring out what was blocking different notaries from making data cap liquid and available, one of the things that came up was that he literally didn't have access to the wallet in which the data cap had ended, because when he applied for data cap, the on-chain address that he was using was actually like a multi-sig address, and he didn't take the address that was actually on his ledger. And so there's sort of two paths that we can take here. So specifically, I guess the broader question is when notaries actually need to rotate addresses or like move their data cap application from one address to another, what are we actually going to enable? Like, one is we just have a well understood path which allows data cap to be moved from like one address to another for a notary. So like have root key holders bring the allocation down to 0, the same way as they would if they were removing a notary, and then bring it back to like what it previously was at the new address for a notary. Or then there's the second option, which is effectively that there needs to be like a technically verifiable path that actually uses just software to make the change. So for example, Kiko is working on a path that supports both the multi-sig address as well as like a ledger on chain for somebody to sign in as a notary and then make allocations from that. So I have a little screenshot of their current beta version, which shows that you can add like your ledger as well as like your multi-sig address on chain.
Hey, Deep. Sorry, I've just been lurking in the back. I had one question around region. Going back to your previous question, how is location determined? Is it where legally the entity is registered, or is it something else? Like, just curious, because obviously there's probably a certain amount of notaries I can imagine all registered in Switzerland, but may or may not legally, their team may not be based there, right? So
that's it's a good question. We had a lot of conversation around this, like when we were doing the first set of like whatever the version of the rubric was that we used to do the scoring. I think it was technically the second version of the rubric. And I think in the application process, and Philip, please feel free to add your opinion if you have one. What we finally went with was more like what the notary self-selected themselves into in terms of operation, like what community they knew they could be active in and where they knew they could easily provide the resource that they needed to be for that particular set of clients. And so we did have like a fair amount of applicants that were like cross-border. And we felt that it was fair to do that if they could actually like participate in the conversations that were required of them and actually serve the needs of that particular community. And so in some cases, I think if Dr. Anshin is here, for example, she's a good example of an organization that's based like outside of North America, but is still serving as a notary in North America and actually reviewing actively like applications in North America.
I mean, the Filecoin Foundation is a better example of case, right? The Filecoin Foundation actually is a US entity, but I am physically in Europe. So kind of like makes most sense that, you know, we've been mostly kind of like looking, or like now progressively more looking at applications that are coming out of Europe. We're sort of like in the beginning, given that we're the first notary, we're just considering everything globally. So I think sort of like these are just as we kind of like bootstrap the program, you know, kind of like, and we have greater liquidity on notaries, and kind of like there'll be more kind of like processes, best practices that sort of like certain regions align on over time. I think that will become less of a discussion.
Cool. Claire, I think that should answer your question. If not, we can continue in chat. So again, talking about this particular case, does anybody have an opinion on like pursuing this path where we keep on iterating on the software as well, or are we comfortable with changing data cap allocations to notary addresses? Because that's the same mechanism we'd use in the previous case with Fleet, for example, as well. Not to call on people, but Andrew, if you have an opinion, for example, as somebody that understands the complexity of the software built on this, I would love to hear your thoughts.
No, I would just stick to the technology fix. We're in the same boat, and I was trying the we set up the multi-sig from the ledger, and I went through the app to try it to learn that it was broken. But now we're just doing it through the original address. It just adds a little overhead, not a huge deal. But for people that don't want to do the overhead, I just have them wait till that pull request is ready. It seems like way less problem than setting up a pathway to move those addresses for now. Like, deal with that headache later. Maybe that's all.
Any other thoughts, opinions? I see JV is sharing that the technical parts should be ready by the end of the week, hopefully. That was going to be one of my questions, was basically how long, like if it's going to be something that's delayed, then maybe we look at, because in general, one of the issues we have today is data cap is a little more scarce than it needs to be. And so if we're trying to solve that problem and things like this are getting in the way, then if there's a cheaper path, maybe we explore it. But if this is like end of the week thing, then I think like just having the right path is more important. Maybe a question for the room is, do we foresee other issues like this? Like notaries, have you run into other similar problems like this when onboarding or ramping up that might be worth flagging or calling out? Because if there's like many such problems, then we should also talk about ensuring that they're addressed quickly, or we have an alternate path. If they're not, and this was like the main thing people run into, and now we have a fix for it, even though there was previously workaround, then I think we can call this conversation good and move to the next topic.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in because nobody's. So two smallish ones. One, people changing the addresses they're applying with might be better if we could standardize that. So I had one applicant that just applied with the existing address that they had already received data cap for, which is actually good because then you can check. We could check what they had actually already received. But maybe we can set it up so they can apply for what the next one should be. So we can actually, because we can't assign new data cap to the old one. So that's one. And then actually very related to that, we had in that flow, I asked the applicant what the new address should be, and they gave it. And then I worked with my coworker Ignacio to get it signed. But in the time that I had given him the address from the issue, and he was going to make the assignment, they had edited the comment, which is my other problem. Is what do we do about history there? And I think it's in the Git history, but it's a little bit hairy if we don't standardize some of those things. Maybe not an emergency, like no fires here, but something to think about long-term for the notaries, those kind of workflows.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd be curious if like having the initial address helped with validating some of the application path, because otherwise there's a route here where basically you just get the address like right at the end when you need to do the actual allocation. But I also know that for some notaries, it's part of their actual like evaluation of a client is to look at activity and things like that on that address. So yeah. I think worthy of a flag. Thanks for bringing that up, Andrew. Should probably become part of the ongoing conversation. I'm going to move on from this into the open issues now, unless there's any other thoughts in the next 5 seconds. All right, cool. So let's talk about some of the issues that were called out last week that have a little bit of follow-up that's worthwhile. So the first one was just this idea of having like data cap markets and like what the distribution of data cap needs to look like. There's a clear point that was brought up, and it's probably worthy of being brought up again, is notaries should not be selling data caps. That's not the point of having a notary. Profiting off of data cap is not like where like the role of notary is in terms of how it serves the network. I think that should be relatively clear. Then there's the second point of like, should clients actually get Filecoin or get compensated for making deals that result in the miner getting data cap? And I think the conversation is mostly evolved where like, oh, like it's technically an open market, and if this is the direction that the market goes to, then it's a fair direction for the market to go to. But it is an indicator that data cap is very scarce. If miners are willing to start paying clients effectively to store the data with them, then maybe there's not enough data cap circulating as there should be. And so we went into quite a bit of conversation in the last call. So for those of you that weren't there, please check out the recording. But basically going through a set of questions for notaries that were there on like what was blocking them from enabling the clients that were applying to them. And it was interesting because there was an opinion that there were not enough notaries, or there were not enough data cap like allocated. But like looking at the data right now, like a huge majority of the data cap that has been given to notaries has still not moved to clients. And so we're trying to figure out like ways in which we can have the notaries feel comfortable with allocating the data cap. Some are definitely more active than others. But some of the questions that were raised last time that we probably should just surface again, these three, which is one, do we have a sense from notaries on the reasonable timeline for responding to requests? So the current was about 5 days. And so what's happening right now is people are effectively waiting 5 days and then pinging a notary, which I just wanted to ask the notaries in the room if that's working for them, if that's been helpful. The second is in terms of resurfacing issues that were orphaned, if there's a format that notaries are feeling like, based on whatever's changed in the last 2 weeks, they're more comfortable with. And then the third is the offer of having more office hours for notaries to feel like they're comfortable understanding the system, understanding the flow of data cap, and enabling them to actually start granting more data cap. And so opening the floor again to the notaries for a few minutes. Are there any opinions on this? Has anything changed in the last 2 weeks? Some data cap has moved, but not that much. And so we're still looking for ways in which we can make it more liquid.
Julian speaking, I can start.
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I think that at the beginning we see many people arguing that there is not enough data cap, and but on all the requests I received from the beginning, just 2 were valid requests actually. And I would say like 50% of the time when I was asking question, I get no answers. So I close it after maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And otherwise it was like minor, especially from China, they were like applying to all the different notaries. But I just get 2 valid requests from the beginning. I got a few other valid requests, one from actually Ide, which is connected on this call, but he was also, he already applied before to Philip. So we said that we stick with just 1 notary. But otherwise, there is not so many clients right now. I think maybe we'll get more when Slingshot will start again. But for now, everybody's waiting. There is not so much. I don't know. I don't have. Maybe you have better analytics than what I've got. But for the market, the storage market. But as far as I see, there is not so much deal right now.
Yeah. We don't have anything more sophisticated. Don't worry, Julian. I'm also going to the GitHub repo and just looking at the requests.
I can build something for you if you like.
I think that's a great segue as well into one of the topics I wanted to ask to talk a little bit about was like just general like RFPs for things that can be built in the ecosystem. But yeah, I wanted to hear any other notaries that have opinions on this. And
No, I'm
especially
fine with
that-
the process right now. I just want to say that to conclude that I'm fine with the process right now. I'm fine with the volume of information we have to manage.
Okay.
I mean, for me, everything is good based on the
Yeah.
number of clients we have today. Of course, if tomorrow we have 100 of clients coming, then at that time, maybe we need to find something different, more industrialized. But based on what we have today, I think it's enough.
Right. That's fair. Based on what you said to Julian, I'd love to hear an opinion on like when a notary asks questions, which at least for most of the applications I saw, like that happens in a majority of cases. How long have you waited before deciding to close the issue if the client doesn't respond to your questions?
I kept it open, I think, for like 20 days.
Okay, so that's quite a bit. Any other notaries that have an opinion? 30 days.
Yeah, I keep them open less than 10 days. So if there's no answer within 10 days, I just close it.
Okay, so that's still quite a bit of buffer, right? Because theoretically, like the client is the one applying and should probably be tracking that. The question to the room is probably then like, do we want to standardize that, or are we okay? Does everybody feel relatively comfortable with their individual processes? Andrew's like, I'm going to drop mine to 10 now.
Yeah, I think it's not necessary to like standardize it, because like so we like in Bushy Capital, like some guys, you may know that we have just published our guideline last week, and so we actually asked our clients to provide lots of the materials, and if they didn't provide enough, we're gonna ask them more. So it will like take us some more times than other notaries. So it depends on case. So I don't think we need to like standardize this.
Cool, that's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that. I think Andrew's still gonna go down to 10 if you ask me, but that sounds reasonable. Let's keep going, because I know we're also now getting into the last sort of quarter of the time slot. Philip, if you wanted to share like for a minute or two on like any updates to the tools that are being built in the ecosystem, and also like paths to getting grants and RFPs.
Yeah, 100%. So first of all, I think we discussed this at the last governance meeting, and I think there was also a thread on Slack somewhere on the just kind of like overall Filecoin Plus transparency dashboard. We have awarded a developer grant to a team that is currently building. We're expecting a first build to be ready, hopefully by end of this week. As soon as we have something we can share with the broader community, we will. What to expect is that this is really a simple dashboard that allows folks to just trace clients and notaries and just see kind of like everything that's been happening on chain. And the neat twist is that that address then actually gets connected with the GitHub issue that served as the notary or the client application. So effectively, you kind of have all the important data within sort of like one interface, and allows you to kind of like track and trace sort of like what's said in the application versus what has been happening on chain. I think sort of like a next step would be to kind of automate a whole bunch of these different things, but I think initially this is sort of like just a way to kind of like get some layer of transparency into the program. That was the first part. And by the way, if there's any kind of like wishes, ideas, hopes, suggestions with regard to transparency dashboard tooling and so forth, then always happy to talk about it. And then sort of like the second part, which is more broadly on developer grants, and which kind of like segues into what I just said before, is if you have an idea, if you think you are uniquely capable, or you want to kind of like you want something to be built in the context of Filecoin Plus, if there's something that would make your lives easier, be it as a notary or as a client, it could be in the context of transparency, it could also not be. Just really any idea, would gladly always brainstorm on those. There is the Developer Grants Program that is being managed by the Filecoin Foundation. So there's money available for ideas to be built. And really, for any more information, there's a I'll post a link to the GitHub repo for the developer grants program where you can find all information on general application guidelines and so forth. But if you just would like to discuss, brainstorm ideas, then feel free to always just ping me on Slack too.
Cool. Last thing I wanted to add on this was we had this issue open, issue number 8, one of the original issues on preparing miners for Filecoin Plus, which kind of ended up into people posting the details as they were miners in the actual issue itself. So if there were miners looking to serve Filecoin Plus demand, they created a little comment in the issue. That then was used to populate a miners.md file, which finally now actually shows up on the Filecoin Plus site. So if you are a client, like if you navigate to the Filecoin Plus site as a client, you actually see like a listing of miners, and that listing is populated directly with this markdown that I've linked below. Many of you have already seen this and PR'd it to add yourselves to the list this week, so that's awesome, and last week as well. And so for those of you that are in the room that are also miners and want to ensure you appear on the list, and for those of you watching the recording in the future, make sure to head over to that link and feel free to PR it. I'm going to them as soon as I can to approve them. It's a relatively quick thing for you to comply with a line, and you're just adding a row in a table basically. And so it's a pretty quick check for me as well to verify that it looks good, and we'll merge these as soon as we can. Moving on to the next newer sort of set of issues. First one, data cap allocation inconsistencies across regions. So there's issue 96 that was filed by Fatman13. Fatman13, if you're here on the call and you want to speak to it, it'd be awesome to hear your perspective. If not, I can sort of give a rundown from what I understood and read.
Hey, Deep. Nice meeting you. I'm Fatman. Hi. Yeah, so the reason we raised this issue is just purely based on our first data cap application. Basically, we think data cap allocation is not as abundant as we thought. I mean, of course, individual experience may vary. It basically took us around 14 days to get 10 gig of data cap. So I mean, meanwhile, the automated process would grant you 8 gig. So, I mean, it kind of it's kind of the process is a bit slow, and we also have to sync with the miners we work with, because the miners are always try to grow their capacity, and they may or may not have enough funds to actually accept the deal to do the publish storage deal message. So we have to sort of the miners also set their minimum basically a minimum like they usually accept deal that's minimum 2 gig plus. So that's also something we want to work with the miners. So yeah, that's about our first experience. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I have a couple of thoughts of this, and I'd love to hear others. One was basically I think like notaries in general are still sort of ramping up. So like a great example of this is like the Fenbushi folks have activated like quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if your application went through them as a notary or through a different notary, but that's like they have a massive amount of data cap. They're the largest notary right now, and as that process becomes smoother for them, my hope is that the turnaround time becomes quicker. The second is notaries that I've seen that are careful about the first data cap allocation are typically doing that because they're expecting you to come back, and it becomes easier and easier for that notary to then give you more data cap in the future. So the hope is, you're probably going to run out of 10 gigs pretty quickly. So you're probably thinking about reapplying already. And so the hope is the second one or the third application, especially going to the same notary. And we're starting to see these relationships where our clients are picking the same notary every time just to ease the burden of the line of questioning. Hopefully it just progresses faster as a result of that context already being built, as well as the confidence that you use that data cap in like in a good way. And of course, like in general, there's the same like topic on like how do we help like notaries get more comfortable, like what's blocking them. So in some cases like Masaki, they're still waiting for access to the tool because they need like access to the multi-sig. And so I'm kind of hoping that this is just like an early friction like issue, and over time it becomes a little bit easier. But if this is yet another data cap, like another point in like the, oh, we need to improve the abundance of data cap, maybe we need to think about like adding even more notaries. Maybe we need to have additional conversations down that line. But I'd like to hear other opinions in the call as well, if there are any, or if you have any thoughts on that. I think I'm seeing some stuff in the
I was just gonna comment on the last bit about like the file size. I actually ran into the same issue when I was trying to store the last meeting with like the minimum file size. Some of it is like a configuration thing. So I've reached out to some of the teams as well so that people can like specify like a minimum piece size for verified deals versus like unverified deals, and like being able to distinguish that way. But I think the 2 GB minimum, and I think at least in the MinerX channel, some folks were mentioning that like 4 GB is their minimum. I think this is like highlighting a need potentially for like a service. I think there's maybe like a couple of solutions to this. I can share some of like the preliminary thoughts that people are like kicking around. Like one idea is like a batching type service where it's like, could there be clients that like do deal packing on behalf of clients to like ship larger quantities together, and then they like, for clients, the clients will like get back when the deal does eventually go through, they can get back like a selector and like a CID. So like you as like an end user client would go through like a broker or like a batching service or something that can like handle the deal packing, which would make it easier to get the deal on chain. But these are like currently like higher level ideas that people are talking about. But the small files issue is currently an issue that other people are running into as well. You are not alone.
Makes sense.
I'll share it.
Yeah. What do you think, Yuling? Do you think that the things that you've heard are like they make sense and it might be worth like waiting around, or do you still actively feel like there's something we should change right now?
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, my other application to Philip actually went through, so
okay.
We are fine for now. But we will after we use that up, we'll be coming back for more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's a quick flag as well to others in the room. There's no reason for you to feel like you cannot apply to other notaries and that you can't apply across borders as well, especially if your use cases do extend. So please feel comfortable to do that. Unless there's other thoughts on this one, I think we should move to the next.
I mean, I would also agree that folks can apply to different notaries, but I think there has to be some measure applied. It can't be that a client is running for like multiple verification diligence processes at the same time.
Yeah.
So that can't work. It can always be the case where a client kind of like doesn't get through a application process, be it because the notary has too busy or whatever. There are many different reasons why it could happen, but it can't there can't be any like double dipping in the sense of like trying to like hedge the outcome with notaries at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the things we should think about between this call and the next is like what is like the way in which we reasonably set. And I think Hide, you brought this up in the past as well, right? Where you just saw people spamming like notaries with applications, and it's just like, oh, this is not reasonable and probably not like a good way to go about ensuring that there's like a successful interaction in the ecosystem. I think that's a completely fair point, Phil. It might be worth thinking about the relationship across diligences. Like maybe part of the application as a client is you also just like link to the other issues that you've opened or something like that. And so notaries also know when to prioritize or not prioritize like an application that's coming in.
Yeah, I agree. Well, is it still that I'm able to ask for a data cap in another region? Because Philip has done a lot of accepting from another region. So is it possible for me to ask some notaries from another location? It sounds odd to me.
So Technically, yeah. I think it depends on like your use case. If you're serving something that actually extends beyond regions and is valuable in a different region, then the point of that notary is to understand the context and the nuances of the region that they serve, right? So if you're bringing a use case that's valuable to the region, then I think it's reasonable. Philip, if you want to talk about some of the apps that you're seeing outside of Europe, that would be probably a good perspective to share.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, if there's any perspective you have on applications that you've received that have come in from outside of Europe, it would be good to share, like,
yeah, I mean,
what's helping you decide.
Yeah, I mean, this is entirely subjective. I'll note that. But we had a high volume, and we also accepted a high volume of applications coming outside of Europe, and that's primarily because the foundation was the first notary, and a large volume for applications was coming from within China, which was totally fine, and kind of like worked through them. But now that there's greater liquidity in terms of like having regional notaries that are up and running and equipped with data cap, at least sort of like for the foundation, and I mentioned this publicly on Slack, is that we are now only focused on client applications that have a very clear and concise use case that is being built on Filecoin versus sort of like clients that are looking to store, quote unquote, a random open source data set. And that's just kind of like us. And the decision is purely based on it seems like there's sufficient supply of data cap available with notaries across Europe, but also in other regions. So if folks still want to apply for that from like a client perspective, then that is certainly covered. But for us, sort of like that has changed.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. We have about 3 minutes left in the call, so I just wanted to use this time to also just highlight 2 new issues that have come in. Maybe we won't have a discussion around them, but at least we can just hear from the people that filed. So issue 94, which is around onboarding projects that have large data cap requirements. Sonic, I believe it was actually something that came up in the call from you. So if you want to share your thoughts, if not, we can hear JV for a minute, because I think he was the one that wrote up the issue in the end.
That was about Starling.
Yes.
As an example.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that was just my opinion on that, but you want me to explain?
Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, so Jonathan proposed different options. I won't go through all of them, but one option I think is interesting is mixing all the benefits in my point of view, is that we've got multiple notary agreeing that, or all the notaries agreeing that there is one client which is too big for just one notary. Data cap to allocate a bigger data cap to this client, and we just identify one notary that is following that client. I don't know if it's something that we can achieve, but this notary will have a specific data cap to allocate to that client, and just to ensure that the client is following the rules in terms of consuming that data cap.
Right. Instead of using up their entire allocation, and also ensuring that like they can reach like a variety of other clients and do due diligence.
Yeah. So doing this, we can have just one notary impacted by this specific customer, and we can have a specific relationship between the client and the notary. We are not creating bottleneck by consuming all the notaries data cap just for one client. And all the other notaries, they can still work on other clients. Yeah, and I mean, I see a lot of benefits doing so, but I just don't know if we can do it. And also, I have one open question about that. If we look at about Starling, they are talking about the total amount of data of like 8 petabytes of data.
Yeah.
So could we? I mean, if we know that these data are real and useful data, but are we going to allocate this 8 petabyte of data of data cap to them and create something like 80 petabyte of power on the network? And especially if they want to store the data to, I don't know, 5, 6, or I don't know, 10 different miners, it's like multiplying by 10 again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a question for the other notaries actually more than anybody else. I would love to see that though. Like, I think it's important.
I think this is actually like, we should figure out what is so I think Discover is also in a similar boat though, even after replication, it'll be much smaller than 80 petabytes or whatever. But I do think, so one, from like the process of like practically, if we don't have a process to like have some sort of community consensus on like how do we allocate data cap to these projects, it's going to have to go through the existing notaries, which means we're going to have to run through like, right now, I think there's something like under 2 petabytes, I think that's about right, of data cap out in the world. And so like, we'll have to do 40 rounds of elections or something. Like, it's just not going to work that way. And that's just for Starling. And so either we like have to figure out how we scale, like how fast the data cap can grow to support some of those use cases, or the other thing that could happen is like this like special purpose, like we'll have to define a process so that the community can say like, no, like you're not doing proper due diligence. Like, how is the data cap? Because like, I think Julian brings a good point. Like, if Starling wants to store a large amount of data, like we have a mechanism to like support this use case on Filecoin, which is fantastic. But like, it seems quite scary to suggest that like 10 specific miners are like the ones that are going to like, I don't know, potentially get like a massive boost in power. And so like, how are they thinking about like the decentralization of that? Like, there's also like a whole logistics side of it, which maybe I can add more comments and thoughts on that issue. But I think, personally, I think there are some people who have reached out with like large data cap requests. So like figuring out like what is a process that like we can feel comfortable. And I think it's going to have to sort of require some sort of like community driven, like we're going to like create a special thing that only goes for this. And like the notaries are just like administering like on behalf to like ensure that it's being spent properly.
Yeah.
It can be like more than one notary. It could also be like a multi-sig of like multiple notaries that together are administering.
I think those are all like very valid paths to explore and points to talk about. So I guess the ask would be, let's chat about it in the issue and then try and come to some sort of consensus. I'm going to say the same thing for the next issue, which is basically we had this pretty big conversation in issue 66 on clients make the most of data cap pricing power. There was a fork sort of, or actually multiple forks of conversation that emerged from that issue. One of them was on decentralization of deal making and like how many miners should a client with data cap actually store with. And so in previous calls, we've tossed around the idea of like having a percentage cap. We've also talked about the difficulty of finding miners sometimes that actually meet the needs that are required of a client to actually deliver storage in a way that is required for that particular use case. And so I just filed a separate issue for it. And so I'd love to just use that issue as the sort of specifically scope of that conversation on like how can we ensure that there's like a reasonable decentralization in the application and workloads that are being brought to Filecoin. So that's issue 98. If you have opinions on that topic, I've just taken a screenshot to sort of give you a sense of what I propose in there, and I'd love to hear some opinions. We're also a little bit over time. I know we had a couple of technical issues getting started, but should be good to go now. So unless there's anything,
yeah, I have one other one. I'll file an issue, but I think Andrew actually mentioned it in the chat, which is worth discussing. So for something like the automatic verifier, right now it is set to give out like 8 gigabytes like once a month. And I wonder, like, I think everyone's probably like used up their 8 gigabyte allocation just for like testing stuff. And like a good question would be like, so what would be the process by which a notary can like change a plan that they've already made? Like it would be a good upgrade, I think, for that allocation to move up to like 32 gigabytes.
Yeah.
But like it would also fundamentally go against this idea of like notaries have a predefined plan that like they have to like execute against. And so this is like creating a new process as well. Maybe it's like as simple as like the notary has to like submit a thing to the community. We have like some period of time for like, I don't know, another governance call at least for people to like talk about it. So like either say like we feel good or not good about it. But I don't know. I'll raise an issue. I think it's an interesting use case. Also, I do think it would be great if the automatic verifier could like support more. But I don't think we have a process that like really answers like how that would be possible.
Yeah. Yeah, worth filing another issue for then, JV. Any other things people want to call out before we wrap this up for today? I know Winan will definitely have some thoughts on the increasing the 8 gigabytes up to something more reasonable.
No. I replied to your what was the latest, the 98 or something?
Yeah.
We replied on your GitHub, so we are waiting for other opinions to see what's happening there.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just joking about what JB and Andrew are suggesting on increasing the automated verifier as well to like give out more data cap for testing purposes.
I don't have an opinion about it. Sounds fine to me.
Deep, are
Yes.
there any near future upgrades of the notaries in Europe? Because we have only called Philip the last few times, but he's also extremely busy, and it's maybe a little bit too much load only on his shoulders. So is there anything in the near future, or are there more like 100 terabyte or larger data cap allocations to maybe Sonic or other ones?
Yeah, I think that we need to have the conversation on like what is the next round of applications look like. I don't think we've had that conversation yet, just because we're still seeing that like a lot of notaries haven't even started like grounding data cap, and maybe it means that we need to separate based on region or based on like the amount of like data cap that's flowing. So I think that it's worth actually. I would sort of recommend.
Yeah,
JB,
some new information from London. I didn't know Keiko also got 100 terabyte in Europe, so that's new for me.
Yeah, but as I understand, they're not. They're the ones that flag that they can't serve as a notary. That we covered earlier.
Sorry. Yeah.
So
well, for us, it's just we follow everything every day, and we are just on one side of the issue, and almost everybody's on the other side of the issues. So everybody is having difficulty with their setup and starting and growing, and we are on the side of just exploding with all new data cap and new ideas. So we are on the leash, and we need to do a little bit more calm.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Sorry, I mixed up Kiko and Fleek. Fleek is the one that's stepping down as a notary. Kiko is still very much serving as a notary, and they have 100 terabytes. So I would certainly say reach out to them.
Yeah.
On the topic of the issues, this is why it's important to have like you as a perspective and have all these various perspectives in the ecosystem, because that's sort of how hopefully we'll come together as a community, drive consensus, and make progress. So thanks for being there to do that and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, thank you too. Well, the best news I heard today was the news from Philip, the protocol update end of this week, to see the insights of the data cap allocations. It will be awesome.
Yeah, and you should definitely get to Kiko for additional data cap, because they have.
Yeah, we will also share our ideas with him the evening.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.